Many of the first generation of black metropolitan artists and intellectuals that thronged the corridors of the BBC during the 1950s and 1960s were moving on, having outgrown the regional overseas services, while some transitioned on to the Home Service and what became the World Service. There was a growing sense of malaise and frustration surrounding the inertia and indifference of the British media. In stark contrast to the post-war years, when any writer worth the name came to London and where over 100 books and thousands of radio scripts flowed from the typewriters and pens of African-Caribbean artists, Camo Brathwaite summed up the diminished media scene in 1968 as follows. "I didn't see West Indian writers, painters, and only a very few actors, and these in stereotyped parts on British television. I was not hearing their voices or the sound of their work on radio. They didn't seem to be participating in the literary and arts pages of the newspapers and magazines that were concerned with these things in this country. This was a remarkable change from the 50s, when West Indian writing was the new thing. The contraction in specialised regional services to the West Indies and West Africa, along with the politicisation of Britain's black communities, served as a stimulus for the establishment of a grassroots black art scene in Britain. The Caribbean Artists Movement, 1966 to 1972, which was co-founded by Brathwaite, assembled many of the prominent figures who had first come together on the airways of the BBC. It also ushered in a new generation of artists, from Linton Kwesi Johnson and Althea McNeish to Errol Lloyd. For others, the declining opportunities at the BBC marked the beginning of the end of their literary adventures in London. Andrew Sulkey, one of the few remaining regulars at the corporation during this period, recalled in his obituary for Sam Selvon that it came as no surprise when the author of The Lonely Londoners emigrated to Canada in the late 1970s. By then, much of the freelance work at Bush House had dwindled considerably. As Lamming added poignantly in personal correspondence with Sulkey, that was the fate of all West Indian writers, including myself. We had our seasons of great popularity when West Indian writing was fashionable in England, and we were the darlings of the salons for a season. But then we had to live through this period of neglect, and only those with creative integrity stayed the course. Writing shortly after the closure of the Caribbean service in 1974, Lamming could not have anticipated that these same short-lived seasons would eventually be remembered for generating one of the most remarkable and transformative periods of cultural production of the 20th century. Radio's rapid ascendancy and steady decline during the same period was more than a coincidence in this regard. If broadcasting had set out to annex West Indian artists and intellectuals, then the literature it produced would also become among the medium's most enduring legacies.